Singapore on Juliu, our top story this hour. China embarks in a series of what it calls unprecedented drills encircling Taiwan in response to U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit. The White House asks Beijing not to use the trip as a pretext for provocation.
There's no reason for Beijing to turn this visit, which is consistent with long-standing U.S. policy, into some sort of crisis.
I'm Steve Light, also this morning, dousing a diplomatic firestorm. U.S.-China tensions cast a cloud over ASEAN ministers gathering in Cambodia. Ramping up pressure on Myanmar's military also on the agenda. Plus, the UN nuclear chief warns a nuclear power plant in Ukraine seized by Russia is completely out of control.
There's a lot of nuclear material there to be inspected, and we have only partial capacity to do that without going. So you have a catalog of things that should never be happening in any nuclear facility.
I'm Eva Hong with your business news. Oil prices gaining in Asia trade after plunging to near 6-month lows overnight. U.S. data points to weak gasoline demand and a surge in inventories. Plus, OPEC and its allies agreed to a modest increase in output. And Singapore's largest lender, DBS, posts its second highest quarterly profit on record as it continues to benefit from interest rate hikes. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi may have wrapped up her controversial visit to Taiwan, but she leaves behind a simmering Taiwan Straits that's threatening to boil over. Now, the island's defense ministry says last night it fired flares at unidentified aircraft and possible drones near the Kinmen Islands.
China is delivering on its warning of retaliation, ramping up military moves to form a blockade. State media Global Times reports these could be rehearsals for future reunification by force. It called the drills unprecedented. It said conventional missiles are expected to fly over Taiwan for the first time. Chinese forces will also get within 12 nautical miles of the island, and the so-called median line in the strait will cease to exist. The drills had already started Tuesday night, with stealth fighters and hypersonic missiles, just as Ms. Pelosi arrived in Taipei. Beijing has warned that its measures will be resolute and continuous.
Such blockading exercises could become routine. The People's Liberation Army is targeting 6 areas encircling Taiwan for live fire drills from today until Sunday. The Taiwan had a taste of the danger yesterday, scrambling jets to push back these Chinese military fighters. It claims 27 planes entered its air defense zone, and 22 of them apparently crossed the median line.
Taiwan's military has raised its level of alertness. It condemned China's drills as irrational. The island says it does not seek war, but will prepare to counter any threats.
Taiwan also fighting disinformation. The Defense Ministry posted this assurance online that there is no missile attack from the Chinese military on Taoyuan International Airport outside Taipei, and that it's business as usual. More than 50 flights have been canceled, but the airport insists it's not linked to China's drills.
China had warned airlines operating in Asia to avoid flying in areas around Taiwan, where it is conducting military exercises. Chinese media say a series of live firing exercises will take place in these 6 areas encircling the island. Now, these areas have been designated as danger zones. The exercises will reportedly include the firing of conventional missiles and long-range artillery. Some airlines have reacted to China's notice. Vietnam Airlines adjusted its flight routes to avoid the airspace near the Taiwan Strait. Bloomberg reported that the Xiamen Airlines announced changes to some flights, citing flow control in Fujian. Korean Airlines is also planning to divert some routes to South Asia. Cathay Pacific pilots were advised to carry 30 minutes worth of extra fuel for possible rerouting in Taiwan. Singapore Airlines says it will monitor the situation closely and make adjustments if necessary. The exercises may also restrict shipping traffic in the waterways. Local branches of China's Maritime Safety Administration issued multiple warnings for ships crossing certain territories. We're looking at live data of all the vessels right now around the region. The Taiwan Strait is a key route for supply chains. Some shippers may need to reroute vessels around the island rather than through the busy waterway between China and Taiwan. The island's port authorities have asked ships to find alternative paths and avoid areas of China's announced drills. They've put out notices that ships going in and out of major harbors across Taiwan should be aware of these drills. A Beijing's mounting pressure is being felt across the wider Indo-Pacific, with countries such as Japan also voicing their concern. Elise with more.
Well, what we do know is that these military drills and the impact of Ms. Pelosi's visit, China has made clear is going to continue even though she has left the island for her next destination. The military had announced just shortly after Ms. Pelosi landed in Taiwan that it would be conducting these military live fire drills from Thursday to Sunday. And the foreign ministry said that the Chinese military had to do this. It said that it could only speak in a language the U.S. and separatist forces in Taiwan, it said, could understand after repeated warnings that Ms. Pelosi should not visit Taiwan. But the drills could be not just a warning to Taiwan or the U.S., but to Japan as well, which we know is a close ally of the U.S. Japan has also talked about upping its defense budget in light of increasing Chinese aggression, it says, towards Taiwan. China's response, this military drill, drawing parallels with the 1995-96 Third Taiwan Straits crisis, where military drills were also conducted. But this time, analysts are pointing out that the scale is much larger. And so Japan has raised concern that it's infringing on its exclusive economic zone, but China refuting this, saying it disagrees. It says that the lines have not been delineated by China and Japan in these waters. So potentially more issues to come.
Despite rising tensions, Nancy Pelosi has remained defiant. She spent 19 hours in Taiwan, but observers expect the repercussions to linger. In a statement, she said China may prevent Taiwan from sending its leaders to global forums, but it cannot prevent anyone from traveling to the island to pay respect to its flourishing democracy with a capital D. Here's what the Chinese foreign minister thinks about her notion of democracy.
这是一场彻头彻尾的闹剧，美方打着所谓民主的幌子，在干着侵犯中国主权的勾当，玩火者绝对没有好下场，犯我中华者必将受到惩处。
China has also halted some trade with Taiwan in retaliation for U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit, and the list could grow as tensions intensify. Since Monday, when American and Taiwanese officials confirmed Ms. Pelosi's plans to travel to the island, Beijing blocked imports of more than 2,000 food items from Taiwan out of about 3,200. This includes fruit and seafood. Beijing cited the detection of pests and positive coronavirus tests. DBS analysts say Taiwan's agricultural shipments accounted for just 0.6% of its total exports last year, so these bans may have only a marginal impact. Beijing has also temporarily halted the export of the natural sand to Taiwan. One type in particular, quartz sand, is an important raw material for chip manufacturing, and Taiwan is home to the world's biggest contract chip maker, TSMC, so chip making in Taiwan could take a hit on top of infrastructure construction. Now, China is Taiwan's largest trading partner. Bilateral trade jumped 26% to nearly $330 billion last year. Analysts say the sanctions so far have been symbolic, but they flagged that if tensions escalate, Beijing could target more high-value exports, direct investments, and Taiwan's manufacturing sector. Analysts say the fallout could amount to billions, but it could also ripple back to the mainland as Taiwanese companies are an integral part of China's value chain.
The White House has weighed in on China ratcheting up military and economic pressure. It is cautioning Beijing against escalating tensions or using Ms. Pelosi's visit as a pretext for provocation.
There's no reason for Beijing to turn this visit, which is consistent with our policy, into some sort of crisis, or to use it as a pretext to increase aggressive military activity in or around the Taiwan Strait.
For weeks, the White House said Ms. Pelosi's visit changes nothing about U.S. policy towards China or Taiwan. Now that her trip has concluded, Nina Maria Potts tells us if it adds to the Biden administration's strategic ambiguity on Taiwan.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi has left in her wake a wave of mixed and muddled messaging over the significance of her visit, and that's on both sides of the Pacific. She returns to a bit of a mess in Washington. Warnings from experts on China about the long-term damage that her visit may have caused. Republicans appear to be applauding her for her snubbing of Beijing, which is hurting the Democrats. But it's the Biden administration's handling of the narrative which is perhaps the most explosive issue, whether her visit has actually inflamed tensions with Beijing and sparked even deeper controversy over the level of US engagement in Taiwan. Arguably, there was a lot more clarity from Beijing than from Washington in both the run-up to her trip and the wrapping up of her visit, a muddle of denials and contradictions from here in Washington.
A burst of Chinese military activity in areas encircling Taiwan has prompted global concern.
G7 foreign ministers have called on China to resolve tension around the Taiwan Strait in a peaceful manner. The bloc says there is no justification to use a visit as pretext for aggressive military activity in the Taiwan Strait. It adds that it's normal and routine for legislators to travel internationally.
The European Union says it encourages a peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues. It has called for tensions to be resolved through dialogue. It also asks to what communication channel that is with China be kept open to avoid miscalculation. The European Commission reiterated the bloc's commitment to the One China policy while also pursuing friendly relations and close cooperation with Taiwan.
Russia, meanwhile, expressed solidarity with China, criticizing the US House Speaker's visit to Taiwan. Singapore's foreign ministry says it hopes the US and China can exercise self-restraint and refrain from actions that will further escalate tensions in the Taiwan Strait. It points out that stable US-China relations are vital for regional peace and prosperity.
After a whirlwind Taiwan trip, Ms. Pelosi has arrived in South Korea today. She is set to hold talks with South Korean National Assembly Speaker Kim Jin-pyo. And on the agenda, North Korea, security in the Indo-Pacific region, and global challenges such as the climate crisis. The joint news conference is scheduled following their talks. President Yoon Suk-yeol is away on vacation, also absent Foreign Minister Park Jin, who is in Cambodia for the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting.
Against the backdrop of rising tensions on the Taiwan Strait, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi will meet his counterparts from ASEAN for in-person talks.
Shaky ties between the U.S. and China casting a cloud on the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting in Cambodia's capital, Phnom Penh. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will also be present for regional security talks, but there are currently no plans for Mr. Blinken to meet one-on-one with Mr. Wang.
ASEAN foreign ministers are seeking ways to help quell the diplomatic storm over Taiwan. Various countries, such as Singapore and Malaysia, have expressed concern. Cambodia says it hopes all sides will try their best to de-escalate tensions. Also high on the agenda is Myanmar. Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen warns that ASEAN will consider its approach on Myanmar should the situation in the country worsen further.
កម្ពុជាក៏ដូចជារដ្ឋសមាជិកអាស៊ានទាំងអស់ខកចិត្តនិងរន្ធត់យ៉ាងក្រៃលែងចំពោះការប្រហារជីវិតសកម្មជនបកប្រឆាំងទាំងនោះបើទោះជាខ្ញុំនិងថ្នាក់ដឹកនាំដទៃទៀតបានអំពាវនាវឲ្យមានការពិចារណាឡើងវិញអំពីការកាត់ទោសប្រហារជីវិតនេះដើម្បីជាប្រយោជន៍នៃកិច្ចសន្ទនានយោបាយសន្តិភាពនិងការបង្រួបបង្រួមជាតិក្នុងករណីមានអ្នកទោសដទៃទៀតដែលនឹងត្រូវកាត់ទោសប្រហារជីវិតយើងនឹងត្រូវបង្ខំចិត្តគិតគូរឡើងវិញអំពីទួលនីតិរបស់យើងចំពោះការព្រមព្រៀងជាឯកច្ឆន្ទ5ចំណុចរបស់អាស៊ាន
As the West seeks more pressure on the country's ruling generals, Russia has other plans. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is heading to Cambodia for the ASEAN meeting, but before that, he made an official visit to Myanmar, touting friendly and long-standing ties.
У нас очень прочный фундамент для дальнейшего наращивания сотрудничества по самому широкому спектру направлений. И мы ценим традиционно дружественный, доверительный характер нашего партнерства, которое не подвержено влиянию каких-либо внешнеполитических конъюнктурных процессов.
Higher interest rates giving DBS's latest earnings a boost with its second largest quarterly profit on record, plus a British summer of discontent as workers mount strikes to seek better pay.
Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong's National Day message will be shown on Monday, 8 August at 6:45 p.m. on CNA. The message will be available on the following websites after the telecast.
If Vice Paradise, the reason was improper use of English. This seemed like I committed a crime.
In the first episode of a two-part series, I unravel our love-hate relationship with singers and reveal the origins of some of the strange and wonderful terms.
Reuben. Why talk a report?
Part 1 of Why We Talk Like That, Monday on CNA.
It is the most iconic brand to come out of travel in the last 20 years.
You're not language change people, I know it.
What it would take to overcome these biases.
What's being done to preserve these natural treasures?
I hope that I can be a useful contribution to the society.
When do we have to get started?
10 years ago. 日本の独特なクリエイティブっていうのがあるような気がします。Imagine a city for both human and non-human life.
The definition of luxury is evolving.
This is the ugly secret behind the beauty business.
What are we leaving behind for future generations?
完全没有什么空气流通，头天他们就对它进水进食。
I can see that Afghanistan under the Taliban era.
Doing homework will not down. This is the circular economy in action.
Contact tracers have uncovered a growing concept to church in Singapore.
The factories of the future will blueprint the way we live, work, and eat. We had to act fast. We had to act decisively.
You don't have to be, oh, look at me, I'm the boss.
We didn't know what agility meant.
Welcome back to Asia First. Singapore's largest lender, DBS, posted its second highest quarterly profit in history as interest rates rise. Net profit beat estimates for the second quarter. It's up 7% on year to 1.8 billion Sing dollars. Net interest income increased 17%. This was helped by a 13 basis point gain in the net interest margin, which rose for the first time in 3 years. The bank said the impact of interest rate hikes was more fully felt in its latest quarter. This helped more than offset a decline in non-interest income due to weaker market conditions. Net fee income declined 12% from a year ago. DBS declared a dividend of 36 Singapore cents for the second quarter. CEO Piyush Gupta said that while the macroeconomic outlook remains uncertain, the bank will benefit from rapidly rising interest rates. Now, DBS caps the Singapore bank earnings season with all three lenders increasing profits driven by higher lending income. Those gains were capped, though, by lower wealth fees amid the global market turmoil. Let's check in on how they're doing in Singapore trade this morning. The DBS Group share price unraveling some of the 2% rally that we saw in the previous session. 0.8% down this morning as the lender flags systemic risks from China as well as a slowdown significantly in Asia. UOB also softer by a bit, while OCBC, which reported yesterday, is hanging on to gains. In the other Asia Pacific indices, it is a broadly positive picture. Gains from Singapore to Sydney as US-China tensions fears recede and good economic data out of America as well as earnings help to lead the Wall Street rally. And we also have oil prices recovering some of the lost ground overnight, at least on the US crude futures that are climbing about 70 cents from the $4 plunge overnight when prices were left deep in the red. And this was on the back of US data unexpectedly showing weak gasoline demand. Brent still sitting well below $97 a barrel. OPEC and its allies have agreed to raise oil production following months of diplomatic efforts by US President Joe Biden, but it's one of the smallest output increases in the history of the cartel, with some analysts calling it an insult. The alliance will add only 100,000 barrels per day in September. That's equivalent to 86 seconds of global demand, or just 0.1% of the world's oil needs. That minuscule increase would be divided proportionally among the 23 members of the cartel. Only Saudi Arabia and the UAE are able to boost production. In fact, only 3 member nations pumped above their targets in June. Everyone else fell short. So the increase in September would probably bring little relief to consumers punished by sky-high oil prices. After President Biden visited Saudi Arabia last month, officials have been optimistic about seeing more supply to help tame fuel costs in the US and support the global economy. But OPEC Plus responded with an increase that was but a drop in the massive bucket. The White House still welcomed the decision but diverted attention to how prices at the pump are doing. SoftBank's partnership with Alibaba continues to evolve as it scrambles to raise cash amid a broad sell-off in tech stocks. Filings secured by the Financial Times show SoftBank has sold about a third of its stake in Alibaba through prepaid forward contracts. And this is a type of derivative which has allowed SoftBank to raise cash while still holding on to the shares. SoftBank has raised as much as $22 billion from those sales, but they would significantly reduce its stake in the Chinese e-commerce giant, possibly below the level required for SoftBank to retain a board seat. If it chooses not to buy back those Alibaba shares, it would mark the end of an era for the global tech giants, which began 2 decades ago when SoftBank founder Masayoshi Son built his fortune on Jack Ma's fledgling startup. The UK is experiencing what many experts are calling the summer of discontent. Hundreds of thousands of workers from numerous industries in both the private and public sectors are going on strikes for better conditions and pay. In London, Chris Jones takes a closer look at the situation.
Picket lines like this are becoming all too familiar across the UK. Rail staff are among the many professionals striking this summer. Members of the RMT union want better pay, conditions, and say no to thousands of planned job cuts. UK inflation has hit a 40-year high at 9.4%, and by November that could reach as much as 12%, and that's making a lot of workers nervous. BT is one of the UK's leading telecommunications companies. For the first time since 1987, its employees have chosen to strike over pay. BT offered an annual $1,800 pay rise, which the company says was the best pay raise offer it had made in 20 years. But the Communication Workers Union Committee turned it down. BT employee and union member Pete Francis says the terms of the pay rise they were offered weren't fair.
It is a dispute on pay. We don't believe that the company, because they basically imposed this pay increase they've given us without any meaningful consultation, or decided to break off consultation and just impose it, something we can't accept.
BT also announced its first sales growth in 5 years for the 3 months ending June. Mr. Francis says because of that, the offer was a smack in the face for employees, many of whom are suffering because of the rising cost of living.
I could say that the summer of discontent. I think it's going to get worse. I think we'll have the autumn of discontent. It'll be the winter of discontent. It's brewing up where it's not just BT. I think, the government have got to get a hold of this, and maybe they've got to talk to these profitable multi-million-pound companies to say you've got to help as well as the government.
Parliament, though, has its own issues with pay for public sector workers. The government has offered NHS workers, so nurses and midwives, the equivalent of a 4% pay rise. It's also offered police officers across England and Wales the equivalent of a 5% pay rise. But unions claim that in real terms, these offers work out to a pay cut against rising inflation. That's caused a massive rift between the public sector and the government, which has just changed the law to protect itself. Temporary workers will now legally be allowed to replace those who choose to go on strike. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps says that this will minimise the power of the unions and lessen the disruption caused by any strike.
We haven't really seen this kind of action at this scale, at this scope, with this many sectors for at least the early 1980s.
Ashok Kumar is a professor of political economy at Birkbeck University. He says no matter how the government tries to protect against strikes, the writing is on the wall.
A clear majority of the country are having a cost of living crisis, which is quite scandalous considering the fact that profits at the top and wages at the top and incomes at the top are going up. And people are acutely aware of that. So there's that disjuncture where people are like, wait a minute, this is something that everyone should fight for.
The UK government is in the midst of its own crisis, though. Both leadership candidates Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak are focusing on economic policy as they bid to become the country's next Prime Minister. Both want to cut taxes to limit the impact of the current worsening cost of living crisis. But with private and public sector workers threatening severe strike action over the coming months, whoever wins the leadership contest will have their work cut out for them. Chris Jones, CNA, London.
Still ahead, a warning from the UN that a huge Ukrainian nuclear plant seized by Russia is completely out of control. And heavy rains in Japan cause widespread damage. Several prefectures are issuing warnings of the highest level.
A university that inspires budding entrepreneurs.
I realized that to create something meaningful and impactful is really to start a tech company
that nurtures promising startups.
Support at all levels, not just mentoring, but also financial support, venture building as well.
And that grows big ideas.
NUS is developing deep tech startups at scale in Southeast Asia.
Watch Startup University, premiering 10th August on CNA.
This program is brought to you by the National University of Singapore.
Japan Paradise Paradise. The reason was improper use of English. This seemed like I committed a crime.
In the first episode of a two-part series, I unravel a love-hate relationship with Singapore and reveal the origins of some of the strange and wonderful terms.
Bluebird.
Part 1 of Why We Talk Like That, Monday on CNA.
The ideas, aspirations, and attitudes of Singaporeans are changing the nation that raised them.
Passionate Singaporeans living out their very ambitious dreams.
Looking to write a story of greatness by showing people practical.
I guess a part of me wanted to connect even deeper with the people.
There's no point playing it safe. Safe will always be forgotten.
If we as Singaporeans are able to have a satellite that we can truly say was conceived, designed, engineered, and built in Singapore. Wow, how wonderful would it be?
In Singapore, we don't give up.
It's 9:30 Singapore Hong Kong time. Here's a look at our top stories. China embarks on a series of what it calls unprecedented drills encircling Taiwan in response to U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit. Several airlines adjusted their flight routes. The White House asks Beijing not to use the trip as a pretext for provocation.
There's no reason for Beijing to turn this visit, which is consistent with long-standing U.S. policy, into some sort of crisis.
Dousing a diplomatic firestorm, U.S.-China tensions cast a cloud over ASEAN ministers gathering in Cambodia, ramping up pressure on Myanmar's military, also on their agenda. Plus, heavy rains caused widespread damage in north and central Japan. Officials urge residents to stay alert for possible floods and landslides.
The United Nations nuclear chief says Europe's largest nuclear plant, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, is completely out of control.
Rafael Grossi warns that the situation there is getting more perilous every day. He's issued an urgent plea to both Moscow and Kyiv to allow experts to inspect the site to prevent an incident.
The IAEA, by its presence, will be a deterrent to any act of violence against this nuclear power plant. So I'm pleading as an international civil servant, as the head of an international organization, I'm pleading to both sides to let this mission proceed.
Mr. Grossi says the physical integrity of the plant has not been respected, citing shelling at the beginning of the war. The plant is now controlled by Russia, but its nuclear operations continue to be run by Ukrainian staff. This, Mr. Grossi says, has led to moments of friction and alleged violence at the facility.
For any nuclear facility to operate normally and safely, there are a number of principles and norms that must be observed. And when we look at the situation, the very unique situation we have in Zaporizhzhia, we see that most of them, if not all, are being violated or not observed or not followed.
Well, meanwhile, the first grain ship to leave the Ukrainian port since the Russian invasion has cleared another hurdle to reach its destination in Lebanon. Kyiv says that would pave the way for more ships to depart, pumping produce back into the world market.
The hope is that the closely watched ship will be the first of many to help ease a global food crisis. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky played it down while speaking virtually to students in Australia. He said the shipment is just a drop in the bucket compared to what's needed.
І зараз, нещодавно, завдяки ООН і партнерстві з Туреччиною пішов перший корабель. Але перший це поки що нічого. Але це тенденція. Дай Бог, щоб воно продовжилось. Тому наслідки цієї війни, вони не тільки для України страшні, вони для всього світу будуть страшні. Просто хтось дуже далеко.
The Rizzoni left Odessa on Monday, heading to Lebanon with nearly 30,000 tons of corn. By Wednesday, the ship had cleared a key inspection by Russian, Ukrainian, Turkish, and UN personnel. Its departure comes after Turkey and the UN brokered a grain and fertilizer export deal between Moscow and Kyiv last month. Russia had blockaded the ports after launching what it calls a special military operation in February. The agreement marked a rare diplomatic breakthrough in a drawn-out war of attrition. Ukraine's infrastructure minister says 17 more ships are loaded and waiting for the green light to set sail. As for the Rizzoni, Ukraine's ambassador to Lebanon says it's expected to arrive in Tripoli within 5 days.
Do head to CNA.Asia to find out how the US Senate has backed Finland and Sweden joining NATO, one major response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and part of the accession process as the alliance's 30 members need to approve the expansion.
The Japanese weather officials have issued a heavy rain emergency warning in the northwestern prefectures of Yamagata and Niigata.
Thousands have been issued evacuation orders amid reports of torrential floods and mudslides in northern and central regions. Niigata is experiencing its heaviest rainfall in decades, while Yamagata reported damage caused by the deluge, with buildings being flooded, cars being swept away, and a bridge collapsing. The Met Agency has called on those in affected areas to move to higher ground.
Three other prefectures have also been issued purple warnings, and that's the highest level in a three-tier scale. Authorities are warning of landslides and have suspended train operations in affected areas. The deluge also causing some rivers in these prefectures to burst its banks.
The U.S. state of Kentucky has barely begun to dry out from historic floods and already is bracing for another bout of extreme weather over the next 2 days. Officials are telling people to prepare for a steam bath, as temperatures are expected to peak around 37 degrees Celsius in some parts. Flood-ravaged areas have been issued a health advisory warning people to be vigilant of heat-related illnesses. Some areas could also see isolated thunderstorms this week.
Biggest concern for today and tomorrow is the weather. It is very, very hot. Highs are ranging in the 90s. It was already getting there by yesterday afternoon in Jackson. They're going to be combined with a humid air mass, and it's going to make it feel much hotter.
More than 400 National Guardsmen have been deployed across the disaster area, handing out cases of water to residents. Authorities are urging thousands of people to brace for extreme heat by heading to one of 8 cooling stations set up. Emergency shelters are filling up as many remain without power. The arduous task of rebuilding after the floods has only just begun. At least 37 people were killed as floodwaters tore homes off their foundations and swept away vehicles in its path.
It's really hard. It took years to gain what we've gained. And I mean, the main thing is that I've got friends that's lost family, and we didn't lose nobody, so we're grateful for that. And we know we can get the material objects back. It's the lives that matter.